All my life, I thought if I worked hard enough, achieved enough, sacrificed enough, my family would finally see me. The world out there applauded me, my colleagues respected me, my company rewarded me, my friends celebrated me. But when it came to my family, none of it seemed to matter. No award, no promotion, no milestone could earn me the place I longed for. I was invisible, a supporting role in a story where someone else was always the star. I told myself it didn't matter, that success in my career was enough to fill the silence left at home. Yet deep down it always stung. Every ignored birthday, every forgotten achievement, every time my mother's eyes lit up for my brother but glazed over when I spoke. It wasn't just oversight, it was a pattern that carved into my bones, a message whispered again and again, "You don't matter as much." On the outside, people saw confidence, competence, a woman in control. But beneath that polish, I carried the weight of being the afterthought. Imagine pouring years into building a life, breaking barriers, pushing through late nights and early mornings, only to come home and realize you are still the shadow of someone else. For a long time, I believed this was love, that devotion meant staying quiet, giving, and waiting for a turn that never came. But on my 34th birthday, something shifted. My family was gathered, but not for me. Not to celebrate the years I had lived, the battles I had fought, the resilience I had built. They gathered to honor someone else again. And in that moment, the silence around my name grew, so loud it broke something open inside me. What do you do when the people who should know you best refuse to see you at all? When they mistake your silence for surrender, your generosity for obligation? Do you keep shrinking to fit their picture, or do you risk stepping out of the frame entirely? This isn't just a story about being overlooked. It's a story about drawing the line between love and erasure, about choosing not to disappear, even when the people closest to you act as if you already have. It's about finding the courage to say, "I deserve more," and meaning it. Because at some point, you stop waiting for recognition. You stop begging for a seat at a table that was never set for you. And instead, you build your own. My story begins there, with the moment I realized invisibility wasn't my destiny, but a role I had the power to walk away from. Would you have the courage to do the same? My name is Rachel Monroe, and on paper, I am exactly the kind of person people imagine when they hear the word successful. I am 34 years old, the director of marketing at a fast-growing health technology company in Chicago. Just last quarter, I led a campaign that increased our revenue by 39%. The CEO handed me a bonus check for $95,000, and my team toasted me with champagne in the office. My name is well regarded in my industry. Recruiters message me constantly, and friends tell me I'm killing it. By most measures, I am thriving. But numbers and titles don't always tell the full story. Because while the outside world might see me as accomplished, at home I am something else entirely. In my family's eyes, I am not Rachel, the marketing director, the strategist, or the woman who worked her way up in one of the most competitive industries in America. To them, I am just Daniel's little sister. Daniel Monroe, my older brother, is a brilliant surgeon. He wears his white coat like a badge of destiny, the golden child since the day he was born. Growing up, everything in our household revolved around him. His soccer games, his science fairs, his graduation speeches. Every milestone was a family holiday. And me, I was the shadow. I was the quiet one in the back row, the afterthought in every photograph, the one asked to take the picture rather than stand in it. It would be one thing if that dynamic faded with time, if adulthood leveled the playing field. But it never did. My parents, Richard and Claudia, continued to orbit around Daniel like planets around the sun. Even now, as a 34-year-old woman with a career I built from scratch, I remain on the outside of their circle. When I was in college, I remember calling my parents with the news that I had earned a full scholarship for graduate school. Their response was polite but lukewarm. 2 sentences. "That's nice, honey." Later that same evening, Daniel announced that he was shadowing a famous surgeon, and the family practically threw a dinner in his honor. Those contrasts were constant. I've spent my entire adult life carrying this contradiction. In Chicago, I am valued, respected, sought after. At home, in the Monroe household, I am invisible. And invisibility leaves scars. It doesn't matter how many accolades you collect if the people whose opinion you crave refuse to acknowledge them. The truth is, I've tried everything. I've tried proving myself louder, working harder, showing up at every family gathering, over-delivering whenever they asked for my help. I've planned anniversary parties, birthdays, even Daniel's engagement celebration, pouring my own money and effort into making their moment shine. And each time, I told myself, maybe this will be the one. Maybe if I give enough, they'll finally see me. But they never did. The spotlight never shifted. Living in that shadow shaped me in ways I didn't fully recognize. It gave me ambition, yes, but also exhaustion. It made me sharp, but it also made me lonely. I became someone who could stand on stage at a national marketing conference and speak with confidence, but who secretly longed for a simple phone call from her mother saying, "I'm proud of you." That call never came. When people hear the phrase, family favoritism, they often think it's harmless, something kids outgrow. But it's not. It is a lifetime of small cuts, of being measured against someone else's worth, and always coming up short in the eyes of those who should love you unconditionally. It teaches you that your achievements don't count unless they are useful to someone else. It teaches you to stay small, to give more than you should, to live in silence. That's the backdrop of my story. A woman who, by all external measures, has everything: money, independence, recognition, but still wrestles with the aching truth that in the place that should matter most, she has never been seen. My success hasn't erased the longing. My promotions haven't softened the sting. And my independence hasn't protected me from the hollow feeling that comes from being a supporting role in your own family. This is where I was on the eve of my 34th birthday, standing between two realities. To the outside world, a high-powered professional with a bright future. But inside, still the overlooked daughter, the younger sister whose value never seemed to register at home. I didn't know it yet, but that birthday would push me to a breaking point. A point where invisibility was no longer survivable. A point where I would have to decide, continue fading into the background, or finally step into my own life. And the choice I made that day changed everything. The night of my 34th birthday should have been a quiet celebration, at least for myself. I had stayed late at the office, finishing up a report, the kind of thing I've done hundreds of times before. My boss had called me in earlier that day and handed me the kind of envelope people dream about: a bonus check for $95,000, recognition for leading the campaign that pushed our revenue up nearly 40%. Everyone clapped, champagne corks popped, and for a moment I let myself feel proud. It was a victory I had earned through months of strategy sessions, sleepless nights, and relentless focus. As I walked out of the building that evening, the Chicago skyline felt different, like it was nodding at me in approval. I remember thinking, this is my day. My birthday. Finally, something to smile about. But the illusion shattered the moment I unlocked my phone. The screen lit up with a stream of photos and videos posted online, my family gathered in our childhood home, glasses raised, smiles wide, surrounding my brother Daniel. Balloons spelled out congratulations, chief of surgery. The living room was decorated as if it were Christmas morning. Everyone was there, my parents, aunts, uncles, cousins. And not one of them had called me. Not one of them remembered it was also my day. It wasn't the first time, but that didn't dull the sting. My chest tightened as I scrolled through picture after picture. Daniel cutting a cake, my parents beaming proudly beside him, relatives posting captions like, "So proud of you, Dr. Monroe." No mention of me. No acknowledgement that their daughter, their niece, was turning 34 at that very moment, walking home alone through the city streets. I thought back to being 12 years old, waiting in my room on a birthday that never came. My parents had promised cake and friends, but when the day arrived, everyone was too busy shuttling Daniel to his soccer tournament. I remember sitting by the window, watching the sunset, whispering, "Happy birthday" to myself. That was the first time I felt invisible. Then came graduate school. The day I received my MBA was supposed to be one of the proudest of my life. I had worked through 2 jobs, sleepless nights, and impossible odds. But the moment I walked across the stage, my parents' attention was already elsewhere. Daniel had just announced his engagement, and that became the headline of the family's conversations. My degree was a footnote, and here I was again, decades later, holding success in one hand and silence in the other. I had repeated the cycle so many times that I could almost predict it. As I climbed the steps to my apartment, my phone rang. For 1 second, My heart leapt. Maybe they hadn't forgotten. Maybe there would be a happy birthday, sweetheart, waiting for me. But when I answered, it was my mother's voice, brisk and distracted. She wasn't calling to celebrate me. She wasn't even aware of the date. She was calling to ask if I could help organize the official dinner to honor Daniel's new title at the hospital. She went on about venues, guest lists, how proud she was of her son, and then casually added, "Rachel, you're so good at these things. You'll handle it, won't you?" I stood there in my kitchen, the city lights stretching through the window behind me, gripping the phone as her words settled like stones in my stomach. Not only had she forgotten, she had enlisted me as the event planner for yet another celebration of my brother. It was as if my only role in the family was to serve as the support staff, the helper, the one who worked in the background while Daniel shined in the spotlight. In that moment, something broke inside me. I realized this wasn't just about a forgotten birthday. It wasn't about one phone call or one party. It was about a lifetime of being overlooked, undervalued, erased. The pain wasn't new, but the clarity was. I could see, with startling sharpness, that my family would never see me unless I forced them to. And even then, I wasn't sure they could. I hung up the phone, sat down at my kitchen table, and let the silence wash over me. 34 years old, accomplished, independent, and still yearning for something as simple as acknowledgement. That night, the weight of all those forgotten moments pressed down on me. But beneath the heaviness, there was also a flicker, small, fragile but undeniable. A flicker that whispered, maybe it's time to stop waiting. Maybe it's time to stop begging to be seen and start living like I already am. That birthday was not a celebration. It was a reckoning. And it was the night everything began to change. The morning after my birthday, I woke up with swollen eyes from a night of restless sleep. My phone buzzed before I even had the chance to make coffee. It was a notification from the family group chat. I braced myself, already expecting to see more photos of Daniel's celebration. But what I saw was something else. A long thread of messages about the upcoming dinner party to officially honor his new position as chief of surgery. Venues, menus, guest lists, all being discussed with excitement. And then, tucked in between my mother's enthusiastic plans, was a sentence that made my blood run cold. Rachel will contribute $25,000. It's only fair. After all, family must support family. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even addressed to me directly. It was written as fact, as if my hard-earned bonus had already been earmarked for someone else's glory. My hands trembled as I scrolled. An aunt chimed in with a thumbs-up emoji. A cousin wrote, "That's the spirit. Daniel deserves the best." And then, the detail that cut sharper than anything else, my own mother spelled my name wrong. Rachel. Not Rachel. Not the name she gave me. Just another careless slip, proof that even in moments when I was being used, I wasn't truly seen. I stared at the screen, a wave of heat rising in my chest. For years, I had complied. I had planned the parties, written the checks, stood on the sidelines with a polite smile while Daniel took the center stage. I had swallowed the disappointment, convincing myself that being the dutiful daughter would eventually earn me love. But this time felt different. This time, it felt like a demand too far. $25,000 wasn't a small request, it was a test. A test of whether I would once again shrink myself to fit into their expectations. I couldn't shake the voice inside my head whispering, "What about you? When is it your turn?" I confided in Maya, my best friend, over lunch. She listened, her brows furrowed, then leaned forward and said what I had been too afraid to admit. "Rach, they're not asking, they're taking. And you're letting them. At some point, you have to stop sacrificing yourself for people who don't even bother to spell your name right." Later that evening, I ran into Mrs. Jenkins, my elderly neighbor who had become something of a grandmother figure to me. I told her about the message, half expecting her to urge me to keep the peace. Instead, she smiled sadly and said, "Darlin', sometimes family confuses love with entitlement. But love doesn't demand you bleed yourself dry. You don't owe them your success. You owe yourself peace." Her words lingered. That weekend, I sat at the family dinner table, the air thick with the scent of roast chicken and unspoken expectations. I watched my parents laugh with Daniel, their faces glowing with pride. When my father finally turned to me and asked about the contribution, phrased not as a question but as a foregone conclusion. I felt my pulse pound in my ears. For the first time in my life, I didn't swallow the words burning on my tongue. I looked straight at them and said, "No, I'm not writing a check. I have plans for my future, and they don't include funding another party for Daniel." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother blinked in confusion, as if she hadn't understood. My father's face reddened, his fork clattering onto his plate. "Selfish," he spat, the word like a slap. "After everything this family has done for you, this is how you repay us." I felt my hands shaking under the table, my throat tightening with fear and years of pent-up grief. But then came something I hadn't expected: relief. The moment the word "no" left my mouth, it was as if a chain had fallen away. For the first time, I wasn't the silent supporter. I wasn't the invisible daughter. I was a woman drawing a line. I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. My father's voice chased me, sharp and angry, but I didn't turn back. I walked out of that dining room with my legs trembling, my chest pounding, but my spirit lighter than it had ever been. That night, as I drove home through the city lights, I realized something important. Setting a boundary doesn't mean you love less. It means you've decided to love yourself, too. For 34 years, I had been waiting for permission to take up space in my own family. But permission was never coming. So I gave it to myself. And that single act of defiance became the first brick in the foundation of a new life I was about to build. When I finally walked away from that dinner, I thought I would feel nothing but fear. Instead, in the quiet days that followed, I felt a flicker of something else: possibility. For years, every decision I made had been tied to what my family wanted, to the unspoken rules of keeping peace, to the constant effort of proving myself to people who never seemed to notice. But now, for the first time, I asked myself a question I had never dared to ask before. What if I lived for me? It started with a late-night search on my laptop, a simple scroll through property listings near Lake Michigan. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Maybe just a dream, a vision of something that could belong entirely to me. Then I saw it. A small 2-bedroom house with pale blue shutters, sitting quietly near the water's edge. The photos weren't perfect. The kitchen needed updating. The paint was chipped, the yard overgrown. But to me, it radiated freedom. Price tag: $420,000. For once, the number didn't scare me. I had my bonus, my savings, my steady income. For once, I didn't have to ask permission or justify it to anyone. I could do this. Signing the papers was both terrifying and exhilarating. As I wired the down payment, my hands shook, but not from fear. This time, it was from the thrill of reclaiming my life. The house wasn't just real estate, it was a declaration. A quiet statement to myself: you matter. Your comfort, your dreams, your joy, they matter. Moving in was chaos and beauty combined. Boxes stacked higher than my shoulders, the sharp scent of fresh paint, the creak of floors that had been waiting for footsteps to return. And through it all, Mrs. Jenkins was by my side. She insisted on helping despite her age, shuffling around the house with a determination that made me laugh. She'd hand me picture frames and say, "This one belongs right where the morning light hits. So you remember every day what you've achieved." Together, we unpacked my life. Not the version my family ignored, but the real one. Awards from campaigns I had led, framed certificates, little souvenirs from conferences around the world. They had sat in storage for years, unseen, uncelebrated. But here, in this home, they finally had a place. As I hung each frame on the wall, I realized I was creating more than decor. I was building a museum of my own worth. One evening, after hours of arranging books and setting up shelves, I stood back and looked around. The living room was far from polished. Boxes still lined the corners, and the furniture was mismatched, but it felt alive with possibility. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for someone else to tell me I had value. I was surrounding myself with evidence of it. Mrs. Jenkins, leaning on her cane, gave me a smile that warmed me from the inside. "You've been carrying these victories in silence for too long," she said softly. "Now let them speak for you." Her words sank deep, because that was the truth. I had spent so much of my life silent, hoping my actions would eventually be noticed, that my sacrifices would finally be acknowledged. But here, in this little lakeside home, the silence transformed into something else. Not emptiness, but peace. A peace that whispered, You don't need their applause to prove your worth. That night, I stood at the back porch overlooking Lake Michigan. The water shimmered under the moonlight, endless and untamed. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and breathed in the cool air. For the first time in decades, I wasn't thinking about whether I had disappointed my parents or measured up to Daniel. I was thinking about what I wanted. The lake, the quiet, the freedom to wake up each morning in a place that reflected me. This house wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And in claiming it, I had taken the first real step toward building a life that didn't revolve around proving myself to others. I was learning, piece by piece, that self-respect doesn't come from family approval. It comes from the courage to choose yourself. And for me, that courage had finally begun to take root, right here, in a little blue house by the lake. When the last box was unpacked and the echoes of emptiness in my new home had been replaced with the hum of life, I knew I wanted to create something that belonged only to me. Not just a room, but a sanctuary. I called it my freedom room. The name came to me late one night as I stacked books into neat rows, the spines glowing under the warm lamplight. It wasn't meant to impress anyone. It was meant to remind me, every time I stepped through the doorway, that this space was mine and mine alone. I filled it carefully, not with random decorations, but with pieces of my life that had always been hidden away. Certificates from campaigns I had poured my heart into, marketing awards that had once collected dust in my office storage, photos of moments I had been proud of, like standing on stage at a healthcare innovation summit or receiving recognition from my company's CEO. 4 years, those memories have been overshadowed, minimized, even dismissed when I try to share them with family. But here, in this room, they were no longer invisible. I hung a corkboard filled with postcards from places I had traveled for work: Berlin, Tokyo, Toronto. I stacked shelves with my favorite books, the ones that had fueled me through sleepless MBA nights and inspired me in boardrooms. I placed a soft armchair by the window, draped a blanket across it, and told myself this would be the seat where I would dream new dreams. With every nail I hammered, every photo I straightened, I felt the space take shape, not as a shrine to the past, but as a promise to myself for the future. When the freedom room was finally complete, I stood in the middle of it and let the silence wash over me. For the first time, I felt surrounded not by expectations, but by evidence of my own strength. It wasn't grand, it wasn't loud, but it was mine. To mark this new chapter, I decided to throw a small housewarming gathering. Nothing fancy, nothing for show, just an evening with the people who truly valued me. Maya was the first to arrive, carrying a bottle of wine and a wide grin. "To your freedom," she toasted, raising her glass as we stood in my kitchen. One by one, colleagues and a few close friends filled the house with laughter and warmth. We ate simple food, swapped stories, and wandered through the rooms I had so carefully put together. When they stepped into the freedom room, their reactions were quiet but powerful. Some paused at the wall of awards, surprised at how much I had accomplished. Others smiled at the travel postcards, asking about the stories behind them. I realized, with a sudden pang, how rarely I allowed people to see the side of me, the side that had worked, fought, and built something meaningful. For once, I wasn't just Rachel the dependable daughter, or Rachel the background character in her brother's success. I was Rachel, the woman who had built a life worth celebrating. At the end of the night, after hugs and promises to return soon, I snapped a photo of the house bathed in warm light. The caption came to me instantly, a birthday gift to myself. Simple, honest, no explanation needed. I posted it on social media before falling asleep, my heart light with contentment. By morning, the backlash had begun. Dozens of missed calls and texts from family members. My mother's voice message dripped with disappointment. "Rachel, why would you flaunt money like this? Do you want the whole world to think you're showing off? This isn't how we raised you." My father's text was harsher, accusing me of embarrassing the family, of trying to compete with Daniel. Even Daniel chimed in with a smug message. "You don't need to prove yourself with a house, Rachel. It just looks desperate." Each word stung, but instead of collapsing under the weight of their disapproval as I once would have, I felt something different. Clarity. Their anger wasn't about me, it was about losing control of me. For the first time, I had chosen something they couldn't take, overshadow, or redirect toward Daniel. And that scared them. I didn't respond. I didn't justify. I simply turned off my phone, walked into my freedom room, and sat in the armchair by the window. I looked around at the life I had built and let the sunlight pour in. The silence was no longer heavy, it was liberating. For so long, I had been waiting for permission to live. And now, in this small house by the lake, I had given it to myself. My family could call it flaunting, arrogance, or selfishness, but I knew the truth. This wasn't about competition, it wasn't about proving a point. It was about finally breathing without asking if I deserved the air. That morning, as I sipped coffee in my new home, I felt it deeply. This was the first chapter of a story I was writing for me, and I wasn't going to let anyone else hold the pen. The days after my housewarming felt like the beginning of freedom, but that illusion didn't last long. The backlash from my family didn't fade, it escalated. My father, who rarely communicated with me outside of family gatherings, sent a long email. Every sentence carried a sting. He wrote that I was forgetting where I came from, that I had allowed money and independence to make me selfish. His words hammered the same theme over and over, that real family sacrifices for each other, and that I was failing my duty. The word duty struck me like a blade. For as long as I could remember, that word had been tied to me like a leash. Duty meant paying for things no one else wanted to pay for. Duty meant planning events no one else cared to organize. Duty meant celebrating Daniel, even when it cost me my joy. Reading my father's email, I realized he wasn't appealing to love or understanding, he was demanding obedience. And then came Daniel's message, short but sharp. You'll regret this, Rachel. Turning your back on blood never ends well. He didn't need to elaborate. The threat was clear. I would be cast out, labeled the selfish one, the cold one, the ungrateful one. It wasn't new. I'd been given those labels in whispers my whole life. But now they were written plainly, with no attempt to disguise them. For the first time, instead of crumbling, I felt my body stiffen with something close to anger. Not the wild anger of shouting or retaliation, but a quiet, grounded anger that whispered, I deserve more than this. Yet even with that clarity, the years of conditioning pulled at me. A small, guilty voice still asked, am I betraying them by saying no? That conflict became too heavy to carry alone, and that's when I decided to start therapy. Walking into the office of Dr. Lawson, a therapist recommended by Maya, I wasn't sure what I expected. I'd always been the strong one, the problem solver, the fixer. Sitting on that couch felt like admitting weakness. But as I spoke about the forgotten birthdays, the overshadowed milestones, the constant expectation to give without receiving, I felt something shift. Dr. Lawson listened quietly, and then she said something simple that cracked the ground beneath me. Rachel, what you describe isn't family love. It's conditioning. You were taught that your worth comes from what you give, not who you are. Her words settled in my chest like truth I had always known but never dared to name. Conditioning. That was why I froze at the word duty. That was why I still felt guilty even when I knew I was right. I had been trained, subtly, consistently, to be useful, not cherished. To serve, not shine. We unpacked memory after memory. My 12th birthday, waiting by the door for a cake that never came because everyone was at Daniel's baseball game. My MBA graduation, where I had walked across the stage with honors, only to have my father whisper that the real celebration was Daniel's engagement party the next day. The countless times my ideas were brushed aside at family dinners, while Daniel's smallest accomplishments were applauded. Dr. Lawson helped me see the pattern, not as isolated hurts, but as a system that kept me in my place. And then came the hardest realization: blood doesn't guarantee love. It doesn't guarantee respect. Family by name doesn't mean family by heart. For years, I had clung to the belief that if I just tried harder, gave more, sacrificed more, stayed quieter, they would finally see me. But therapy forced me to confront the truth. They had seen me all along. They just didn't value me the way I deserved to be valued. Walking out of therapy that day, the city felt different. The building stood taller, the air felt clearer. For the first time, I wasn't carrying the weight of trying to earn their love. I still loved them in my own way, but I no longer mistook obligation for affection. Of course, the messages kept coming. My father's emails grew colder, Daniel's texts more cutting. But each time, I returned to what I had learned. Their disapproval was not proof of my failure. It was proof that I was breaking free from a role I was never meant to play. It wasn't easy. There were nights I cried into my pillow, mourning the family I wished I had but never did. Yet even in those tears, I felt a quiet resolve. This was the turning point. I wasn't abandoning my family. I was finally choosing myself. And for the first time in decades, that choice didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like survival. It felt like freedom. When my 35th birthday finally arrived, it felt unlike any birthday I had ever known. The air was cool and crisp by the lake, sunlight glinting off the water as if even the world itself wanted to celebrate with me. My home, once so new and empty, now pulsed with life. Friends filled the rooms, colleagues laughed on the porch, and there was music playing faintly in the background. This time, no one had forgotten. No one had brushed me aside. I was not the afterthought. I was the center of my own celebration. We toasted not only my birthday, but also my promotion, senior marketing director. It had been a grueling year of work, late nights and leadership challenges, but I had proven myself. My team had rallied behind me, my campaigns had soared, and for the first time, the recognition matched the effort. When Maya clinked her glass against mine and shouted, "To Rachel! Finally the title she deserves," the entire room cheered. I felt the warmth seep into my bones, deeper than the wine, deeper than the laughter. This was what acknowledgement felt like. This was the family I had chosen. As I moved through the house, pausing in conversations and sharing smiles, I couldn't help but glance toward the Freedom Room. It stood open, its light spilling into the hallway, a quiet reminder of how far I'd come. A year ago, I had built that room to prove to myself that I existed, that I mattered. Now, I didn't need the proof as much, but I still cherished it because it symbolized the moment I began choosing myself. Then came the surprise. I heard the creak of the front door, followed by a hesitant silence that spread like ripples in water. When I turned, I saw Daniel. My chest tightened immediately, instinctively. He wasn't part of this world, this circle of friends and colleagues who saw me clearly. Yet there he was, standing in the doorway, not in his white coat or confident posture, but in a simple sweater, holding something carefully wrapped in his hands. He walked toward me slowly, as if unsure whether he'd be welcomed. When he handed me the gift, I noticed his fingers trembled just slightly. I unwrapped it and froze. Inside the frame was an old photo of the two of us as children, me in a bright red dress, him with his arm around my shoulder, both of us grinning in a way that hadn't been captured in years. Daniel cleared his throat, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "I found this in Dad's old boxes," he said. "I thought it belonged with you." He paused, his eyes flicking down. "The truth is, Rachel, I used to envy you. You always pushed forward, no matter what. I didn't know how to admit it, so I ignored you instead. It was easier than acknowledging my own jealousy." The words hung in the air, raw and unexpected. For years, I had carried the weight of his silence, his complicity in the favoritism. Now here he was, not excusing it, but naming it. Something in me softened, not with full forgiveness, but with recognition that maybe he was finally trying to see me. As if the moment weren't heavy enough, another figure appeared in the doorway. My mother. She held a cake in her hands, frosted simply, with small orange shavings on top. My breath caught immediately. Carrot cake, my favorite since I was a little girl, the cake she used to bake when I was 6 or 7, before the years of neglect began swallowing traditions. She set it down carefully, her voice trembling. "I remembered this year," she said. "Happy birthday, Rachel." The room grew quiet, my friends and colleagues respectfully stepping back to give space. My heart was conflicted, grateful, wary, cautious. The carrot cake didn't erase years of being unseen. Daniel's gift didn't undo the messages, the pressure, the erasure. But together, they formed something small yet undeniable, a sign of change. I invited them to stay, though I knew my boundaries were still firm. I would not slip back into old patterns. This home, this life was mine. But I could allow them to enter, cautiously, as long as I didn't lose myself again. As candles were lit and voices rose to sing, I looked around at the mixture of old and new, family by blood, family by choice. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to choose between them. I had chosen myself first, and that made all the difference. Blowing out the candles, I made no grand wish. I didn't need to. My wish was already alive in front of me, a life where I was no longer invisible. A life where love, when it came, was real. When the cake was set on the table and the candles flickered in the dim light, I looked at Daniel and my mother standing there, awkward, uncertain, almost out of place among the friends and colleagues who had carried me through the past year. A year ago, I would have clung to this moment, desperate for any scrap of acknowledgement, ready to bend myself into whatever shape they needed just to keep them close. But now I saw it differently. I invited them to stay, and they did, quietly taking seats at the edge of the gathering. Yet before the evening could carry us all into small talk and laughter, I felt the weight of something that needed to be spoken. For so many years, silence had been my prison. Not tonight. I stood by the table, my voice steady. "I'm glad you're here," I told them, "but I need to be clear about something. I won't go back to being invisible. I won't fade into the background so Daniel can shine brighter. I won't carry the weight of being the dependable one while my own needs are ignored." My friends listened silently, the room holding its breath. If we're going to have a relationship moving forward, it has to be built on respect, not obligation. On love, not guilt. For once, neither my father's stern commands nor Daniel's smug confidence interrupted. My mother's eyes welled with tears, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Daniel looked down at the photo frame he had brought me, his thumb brushing over the glass as if he needed something to hold on to. There were no apologies, no grand gestures, just silence. But in that silence, I felt a shift. The power dynamic I had grown up with, the hierarchy that placed me as second, as lesser, was gone. Not because they suddenly changed, but because I no longer accepted the role. I had redrawn the lines, and whether they chose to step inside those boundaries or walk away was their decision. Mine was already made. Later, as the candles were lit and the room sang softly, I leaned forward and closed my eyes for a brief moment. I didn't wish for their approval. I didn't wish for the family I had long imagined. My wish, if there was one, was already alive in me, to continue living fully as myself, unapologetically, without shrinking to fit into someone else's idea of worth. When I blew out the candles, the flames disappeared in an instant, but the glow inside me remained. I smiled, not the polite smile of a daughter trying to keep peace, but the genuine smile of a woman who finally understood her own value. The evening carried on with warmth and laughter. My colleagues congratulated me again on the promotion. Maya squeezed my hand and whispered, "I'm proud of you," and even Mrs. Jenkins sent me a wink from across the room. I felt surrounded by something I once thought only blood could provide: family. But now I knew better. Family is not just who you are born to. It is who shows up for you when you need them, who sees you clearly, and chooses to honor you as you are. Blood might bind, but love sustains. Respect sustains. And that I had built here, in this house by the lake, with the people who truly cherish me. When the night grew quiet and the last guests left, I lingered in the Freedom Room, the framed photo of me and Daniel resting on the desk. A symbol of the past, and maybe, just maybe, of the possibility of something new. But I didn't cling to it the way I once would have. It was not proof of my worth. It was simply a piece of my story, one among many. What mattered most was clear now. My value didn't come from their applause, their approval, or their recognition. My value came from the life I had built, the boundaries I had set, and the courage to honor myself even when it meant standing alone. Except I wasn't alone anymore. I had chosen a different kind of family. And in choosing that, I had chosen me.